There was a time when a prison guard was killed simply because a gang leader didn't like the way he looked at him. And that is just one example of the power these men hold behind bars. While most people assume prison strips away control, the truth is that some inmates rise to the top and become more powerful inside than they ever were on the outside. These are the men who lead America's most dangerous prison gangs, groups so feared that even correctional officers hesitate to confront them. They not just control prison life, but also influence gang politics on the streets and are connected to drug trafficking, extortion, and high-level criminal operations far beyond the prison walls. From the white supremacist roots of the Aryan Brotherhood to the structured codes of the Mexican Mafia, and from the revolutionary ideals of the Black Guerrilla family to the deadly discipline of La Nuestra Familia, each of these organizations has a story. Join us as we explore the gang leaders who control not just prison blocks, but entire criminal networks, starting with the Mexican Mafia. The Mexican Mafia, also called La M, which means the M in Spanish, might sound like something born in the streets of Mexico, but that's not the case at all. This gang was built right inside a U.S. prison. It all started back in 1957 when 13 Hispanic gang members from different Los Angeles neighborhoods were locked up at Dual Vocational Institution in California. That prison was supposed to reform young men, but instead it became the birthplace of one of the deadliest prison gangs in U.S. history. These guys weren't just bored inmates looking for trouble. They came together for a reason, and that reason was to protect themselves from other gangs. Luis Huero Buff Flores, one of the founding members, was a known figure from the Barrio Hawaiian Gardens gang. He did something no one thought was possible at the time. He brought together men from rival gangs, guys who would have killed each other on the streets, and united them under one name. They weren't friends, but in prison, survival came first. La M quickly became feared inside the prison walls. Flores made sure the ones who joined were the most violent, the most aggressive. They wanted to take over black market trades inside the prison, drugs, weapons, protection, and they were ready to shed blood to do it. Ramon Mundo Mendoza, a La M member, once said that in the beginning their goal was simple: terrorize the prison system and enjoy prison comforts while doing time. And that's exactly what they did. As La M grew, so did the violence. By 1961, the chaos got so bad at Duel that the prison administration moved some of the founding members to San Quentin. They hoped separating them would cool things down. Instead, it made things worse. One of the early members, Cheyenne Cadena, arrived at San Quentin and was immediately targeted. A massive black inmate approached and kissed him, a clear sign of disrespect in prison. Cadena didn't let it slide. He came back later, walked straight up to the man and stabbed him to death with a homemade shiv. Even with hundreds of inmates around, nobody said a word. That's how feared they were. That killing was just the start. One murder led to another as La M members began staking their claim in San Quentin. They weren't just protecting themselves anymore. They were sending a message. We run this yard. But not everyone agreed with how they operated. Some Mexican-American inmates started to feel fed up. They were tired of being robbed, stabbed, and pushed around by their own people. So in secret, a few of them formed a new gang. They called themselves Nuestra Familia, or Our Family. It began in the mid-1960s at the California Correctional Training Facility in Soledad. Unlike La M, this gang pulled in members mostly from rural areas in Northern California. La M looked down on them, calling them just a bunch of farmers. But it didn't take long before things got bloody. The rivalry between La M and Nuestra Familia officially exploded in 1968 at San Quentin. The spark, a pair of shoes, a La M soldado stole them from an inmate linked to Nuestra Familia. That small act of disrespect turned into a full-scale riot known today as the Shoe War. 19 inmates were stabbed. One La M member was killed. That day proved that Nuestra Familia wasn't just another small group. They were a real threat. And from that moment, the war between these two gangs never really ended. But while they had enemies, La May didn't stop growing. Their violence gave them more power, and that power gave them more control. What began as a prison gang quickly extended into the streets. Once members were released, they didn't go back to normal life. They brought the rules and violence of prison with them. Drug dealers in Southern California were forced to pay taxes to La May or face the consequences. That's how they started controlling narcotics operations even outside the prison walls. And here's something chilling. Law enforcement says they now control every Hispanic street gang in Southern California, including infamous names like MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang. Inside prison, race decides your side. It doesn't matter what street gang you came from. If you're Hispanic, La May expects loyalty. By the 1970s, La May's name was feared not just in California, but in other states too. Around 1974, inmates at Arizona State Prison in Florence began forming their own version of the gang. They modeled themselves after the original Mexican Mafia and brought in the same ideas. But over time, things took a turn. In 1978, the Arizona version split. One side stuck to the old ways and stayed loyal to the California-based group. They called themselves the original Mexican Mafia or Califas faction. The other side, they created a new path and started calling themselves the New Mexican Mafia. And they weren't about to share power. The split caused serious problems. Members of both groups began attacking and even killing each other over who had the right to use the name Mexican Mafia inside Arizona's prisons. It wasn't just about reputation, it was about leadership, money, and power. The New Mexican Mafia developed its own rules and structure. Every member got to vote on major decisions, including leadership and who got accepted into the gang. Their chosen leader held real power and could make major calls on behalf of the group. It was organized, it was violent, and it was deadly. Even though they were no longer part of the original La May, they carried the same mission. Take control of the prison system and spread fear. That mission didn't change, just the name on the patch. Speaking of which, did you know that inside the Mexican Mafia, rules are everything? This gang doesn't work like street crews that fall apart when a leader gets locked up. La May is structured, disciplined, and built to last. It doesn't have just one boss calling the shots. Instead, multiple members hold the power to give deadly orders, and each one has their own crew ready to move when needed. Law enforcement says the gang has close to 1,000 loyal associates with control over tens of thousands of foot soldiers, mainly Serenos, who carry out orders both inside and outside prison. But loyalty doesn't come easy. Every member has to prove themselves, usually through blood. That could mean stabbing someone, committing murder, or stealing something valuable. Refusing to follow orders isn't an option. The price for saying no or messing up is often death. La May doesn't believe in second chances, and they don't forget. There are 4 major things that can get a member killed: becoming a snitch, acting cowardly, being openly homosexual, or showing disrespect to another made member. You see, these aren't just rules. They're part of the gang's code, and breaking them can cost you your life. Even if someone has to be killed for violating gang policy, it has to be done by the person who first sponsored them. That's how deep the responsibility runs. One of the strongest rules is this: membership is for life. The only way out is death. That oath, created in the 1960s by Luis Hueroba Flores and Rudy Cheyenne Cadena, changed everything. Before that, members could leave and return to their street gangs, but not anymore. Once you're in forever. There's no walking away. La May's blood oath turned it from a loose prison crew into a deadly brotherhood. With that oath came a set of gang commandments that laid the foundation for how members were supposed to act. A new recruit had to be sponsored by someone already in the gang. In the past, every member had to vote yes before someone could be brought in. But that rule was eventually dropped as the gang expanded. One of the strictest rules says the gang comes before anything: your family, your religion, even your God. And this isn't just something members say, it's something they live by. If a member chooses family over orders, that's seen as betrayal, and betrayal has only one punishment. Even more shocking, members are not allowed to raise a hand against another member without permission from higher-ups. There's a chain of command, and going against it is seen as disrespect. Stealing from another member? That's a death sentence. Getting involved with another member's wife or girlfriend? Same thing. They have rules for everything, from how to act to who they can target. For example, you can't harm another member's family. You must show kindness and respect. But outsiders, that's a different story. If someone crosses la ley, retaliation is guaranteed. It doesn't matter if it takes years, they'll come back for you. They say, vendetta must be carried out even if it takes months, years, or decades. If a la ley member is killed by cops, by another gang, or anyone else, the revenge has to be immediate, and it has to be brutal. This gang doesn't believe in mercy. Dropouts and traitors are also on the hit list. Leaving the gang makes you a target. Once you're labeled a traitor, you're marked for death, no matter where you hide. Members are also told to never interfere with each other's business. Money, drugs, and power can get messy, so the rule is clear. Stay in your lane unless you're ready to deal with the consequences. And while the gang allows violence, one line they won't cross is harming children. That's one of the few rules where there's no debate. Even though la ley is mostly hidden from the public, their presence is loud and clear inside prison and on the streets. You'll recognize their symbols, the black hand and tattoos showing the Mexican national emblem, an eagle and a snake. Sometimes it's surrounded by flames placed above crossed knives. These aren't just tattoos, they're marks of loyalty, power, and fear. Many street gangs tied to la ley also use the number 13 as a sign of respect. That's because M is the 13th letter of the alphabet. Speaking of which, their grip is strongest in Southern California, where almost every Hispanic gang is expected to follow their lead. Sereno gangs, those who serve under la ley, are expected to obey without question. Disobeying a direct order is asking for death. Even MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang, two of the most violent street gangs out there, are said to fall under la ley's influence when it comes to prison politics. La ley also knows how to build alliances. One of their strongest connections is with the Aryan Brotherhood. Even though the two groups come from different racial backgrounds, they've found common ground, especially when dealing with enemies like Nuestra Familia and the Black Guerrilla family. These rival gangs have their own soldiers, rules, and codes, but the history of blood between them runs deep. The conflict with Nuestra Familia started decades ago and still burns today. The two groups don't just fight over turf, they fight over pride, power, and respect. Nuestra Familia is mostly made up of Northern California inmates, while La ley holds the South. Anyone caught in between either joins a side or becomes a victim. Over time, other enemies have entered the picture. The Bloods and Crip, while not traditional rivals, have clashed with La ley depending on the situation inside different prison yards. But no matter who the enemy is, La ley's response stays the same. Fight back fast, fight back hard, and never back down. This gang lives by violence, moves with silence, and rules through fear. Everything, from their symbols to their rules, is designed to show dominance. And in their world, once you're in, you ride till death. Their presence isn't just felt, it's enforced, with every move calculated and every order echoing far beyond the prison walls. To truly understand how deep their power runs, we have to go back to where it all began. The Mexican Mafia, or La ley, has never been just about prison politics. From the start, their game was violence and control. Even back in 1957, they were already sending a message. That year, two members, Gregory Huerta Valenzuela and Agustin Acosta, killed a grocer named Jose Castellanos during a robbery in East LA. But what shocked everyone came later. While on trial for that murder, they attacked a sheriff's sergeant with sharpened spoons right inside the courthouse. That kind of boldness became the Mafia's trademark. Just a year later, in 1958, the first murder of a prison guard by La ley was carried out at San Quentin by Doroteo Sleepy Betancourt and Frank Moose Bazure. These early killings showed that La ley was building something deadly, something that didn't care about consequences. It wasn't just about survival, it was about taking over. And they did just that. By the 1970s, La ley was already pulling strings far beyond prison walls. The first known outside the prison hit ordered by the gang happened in 1971. Alfonso Pachi Alvarez was shot twice in the head. His crime? Collecting drug money without kicking up to the shot callers behind bars, the big homies. The man who gave the order was Joe Pegleg Morgan, one of the highest-ranking members at the time, even though he wasn't Mexican by blood. Morgan's role in the mafia was big. He had deep drug connections in Mexico and helped build La Eme's narcotics pipeline across California. With his backing, La Eme started touching every corner of the drug trade. They didn't stop there. Under Cadena's leadership, they infiltrated government-funded rehab programs like Get Going and used the money to fuel their gang operations. One woman, Ellen Delia, tried to expose this, but she was murdered before she could testify. Her files, gone, just like that. The 1980s proved that La Eme had no boundaries. In 1984, Alfred Arthur Chato Sandoval killed two rival gang members in East LA and later shot a couple execution style just because the man had allegedly snitched. Sandoval was sentenced to death, but that didn't end the violence. Just 1 year later, in 1985, the Ayala brothers, Hector and Ronaldo, carried out a triple execution inside a San Diego auto shop. The victims had refused to pay $10,000 to the mafia. One man survived and later testified against them. Ronaldo Ayala got the death penalty. His brother Hector did too. The third guy on trial walked free, but the killing sent a message. You don't play games with La Eme. If you owe, you pay or die. In 1991, inside Los Angeles County Jail, Benjamin Topo Peters and Rene Boxer Enriquez stabbed a fellow mafia member, Salvador Mon Buenrostro, 26 times. Mon had supported someone who went against Joe Morgan, and that alone was enough to get him marked. He survived, but the message was loud and clear. Loyalty matters more than friendship. Then there was Charlie Brown Manriquez. He refused to carry out a planned stabbing in Chino State Prison. That refusal marked him as a coward, an unforgivable offense. David Smiling Gallardo found him in the Ramona Gardens housing project and shot him dead in 1992. There are no passes in La Eme. One mistake, and you're gone. In 1998, federal agents made their move. They indicted 22 Mexican Mafia members and associates under the RICO Act. This time, the charges were bigger: murder, kidnapping, extortion, and planning hits on those who disrespected La Eme, including anti-gang activists. One of the men on the list was Benjamin Topo Peters, then believed to be the highest-ranking shot caller. The feds had watched as La Eme flexed its muscle in East LA. In 1992, Joe Morgan gave the order to stop all drive-by shootings by Serrano gangs. And just like that, the violence in East LA dropped. No police program had ever managed to do that. But La Eme could, with just a few words from behind prison walls. As the 2000s came in, La Eme kept its grip tight. Mike Acha Eisen, a veteran member with decades behind bars, was beaten to death with pool cues in 2001 during a bar fight. The man had survived years in California's hardest prisons, but a simple street fight ended him. Even the toughest can fall. In 2006, another wave of arrests hit the mafia. A 36-count indictment charged members with violence, drug dealing, and extorting smaller Latino gangs. Some leaders were in isolation cells, locked up 23 hours a day, but they still passed messages through plumbing pipes, through smuggled letters, through guards they paid off. Nothing could shut them up, and their goal stayed the same: to control the drug game completely. Then, in 2011, Azusa 13 gang members were hit with federal charges for intimidating black residents in Southern California. The message was part of La Eme's racial politics inside prison. Then in 2012, a massive crackdown happened in San Diego. Rudy Crazy Espudo was arrested for running a wide criminal network. He made drug dealers pay tribute or face serious consequences. Local street gangs were smuggling meth and fentanyl into the Vista Detention Center, working under his command. By 2022, the violence boiled over again. A fight between La Eme and MS-13 at Beaumont Penitentiary in Texas left 2 inmates dead. The government locked down every federal prison across the country, scared of what could come next. It didn't stop there. In May 2023, a major bust went down. Law enforcement arrested 12 La Eme members and seized 23 guns, nearly 58 pounds of meth, thousands of fentanyl pills, and cocaine. The raid stretched from Los Angeles all the way to Bakersfield. Then, quite recently, in 2025, another storm hit. A 6-month investigation led to the arrest of 39 people tied to the Mafia. They were accused of murder, arson, weapons trafficking, and running drug rings. The cops found dozens of firearms, large amounts of meth, fentanyl, and coke. The operation proved one thing. Even from behind bars, La Eme leaders still gave the orders, and their soldiers still obeyed. But did you know that even Hollywood wasn't safe from La Eme's reach? In 1992, the film American Me told the story of a gang leader based on Rodolfo Cadena, one of La Eme's real-life figures. Actor Edward James Olmos directed and starred in the movie. But the Mexican Mafia didn't like what they saw. They were especially angry about how Cadena's death was shown, as well as scenes of rape and betrayal. Those parts, they said, disrespected the gang. The fallout was real. 2 consultants for the film were murdered shortly after it came out. Olmos received death threats. He even applied for a gun permit, but it got denied. In prison, Joe "Pegleg" Morgan filed a lawsuit against Olmos and Universal Studios. He claimed the film used his life story without permission. A year later, in 1993, another movie hit the screen, Blood In, Blood Out. This time, the story followed a fictional gang called La Onda, inspired by the Mexican Mafia. The main character, Miklo Velka, was based on Pegleg Morgan. Just like Morgan, Miklo was white and lost a leg during a robbery. The rival prison gangs in the film were also based on real ones. La Onda represented La Eme. The Black Guerrilla Army stood for the Black Guerrilla family. Aryan Vanguard echoed the Aryan Brotherhood. Though these films were fiction, the fear they sparked was real. La Eme doesn't play around when it comes to its image. In their world, respect is everything. And any disrespect on the yard, on the street, or on a movie screen is paid for in blood. That's how deep their code runs. That's how long their reach goes. From East LA neighborhoods to Hollywood sound stages, from prison cells to rehab centers, and from coded taps on water pipes to federal lockdowns, La Eme makes sure their name is never forgotten. But La Eme isn't the only gang with that kind of grip. On the other side of the racial divide, another name carries just as much fear, one built on white supremacy, violence, and power behind bars. The Aryan Brotherhood. The Aryan Brotherhood, also known as AB or simply the Brand, didn't start out as the largest white prison gang in America, but it didn't take long before its name became feared in lockups across the country. It began in California's San Quentin State Prison in the 1960s, a time when prisons were just starting to desegregate. Tensions were high, and racial lines were being drawn in blood. As black inmates formed the Black Guerrilla family, the Aryan Brotherhood formed to push back and protect their own. They were believed to have taken ideas from the Bluebird Gang, but the Brand quickly became something else entirely. From the start, they made it clear that this wasn't just about pride or race. This was about control. The violence they used was brutal and cold. In 1975, the Brotherhood kicked off a race war inside the California prison system, clashing hard with both La Nuestra Familia and the Black Guerrilla family. The bloodshed was so intense that prison officials had to split the gangs up and house them in different facilities. But that didn't stop AB. When they were isolated in Chino prison, they only got stronger. With space to organize, they built a leadership structure that allowed them to keep calling shots across different prisons. They didn't just fight for power, they demanded total loyalty. To join the Brand, you had to be white, you had to be willing to kill, and you had to understand there was no way out except death. It was blood in, blood out. The Brotherhood became a family, but one held together by oaths and fear. From the beginning, they were carving their place out through force, and they had no plans to stop. The Aryan Brotherhood isn't a gang that hides. They mark themselves with tattoos that speak loud and clear. Green shamrocks, the letters AB, the number 666, swastikas, SS bolts. These aren't just ink, they're badges of commitment. A member doesn't just join, he gets branded. That branding, inspired by prison novels and real-world rituals, marks him for life. But the tattoos are just the surface. What lies beneath is an 8-line oath, a blood promise that seals the deal. It's more than words. It's a life contract. And the message is clear: you leave only when you're dead. Members swear on mottos like blood in, blood out, knowing that breaking ranks means execution. There is no forgiveness, no second chances. Once you're in, you ride till the end. They have a structure too. Though it can vary by prison, most of the Brotherhood follows a hierarchy. At the top sits a 3-man commission supported by a 12-man council. Orders come from the top and trickle down, and everyone obeys. Disobedience isn't punished with warnings, it's punished with blood. Despite being a tiny percentage of the prison population, the Aryan Brotherhood is responsible for a shocking number of prison murders, as much as 25% in federal lockups, according to the FBI. They don't kill at random, they kill with purpose, for power, for discipline, for money, and for the message it sends. Their rise wasn't just about tattoos and threats, it was the body count that really put their name on the map. In 1981, 2 of their most violent members, Thomas Silverstein and Clayton Fountain, strangled a black inmate named Robert Chappelle at the Marion Federal Prison. They didn't stop there. Soon after, they stabbed Chappelle's friend Raymond Smith 67 times. But they were only warming up. Silverstein had something bigger in mind. He wanted a guard dead. On October 22, 1983, Silverstein used a handmade knife and a smuggled handcuff key to unlock himself during a routine shower trip. He stabbed Officer Merle Klutz more than 40 times. Just hours later, Fountain did the same to Officer Robert Hoffman. These killings shocked the country. 2 federal correctional officers dead in one day. The method, the planning, the execution, it was unlike anything seen before. These were not chaotic attacks. They were calculated moves. The Brotherhood wasn't just a gang anymore. They were a machine. As the 1990s came, their focus started to shift. They weren't just a racist gang killing for ideology anymore. Now it was business. Organized crime. The Aryan Brotherhood started running drugs, extorting inmates, controlling prostitution inside prisons, and taking murder-for-hire jobs. Their influence grew to the point where they even had more pull in prison than some mafia families. In one shocking example, when infamous mob boss John Gotti was attacked by a black inmate in 1996, he turned to the Aryan Brotherhood for help. Word spread fast. The Brotherhood was ready to retaliate. But before anything could happen, the attacker was put in protective custody. That was the kind of weight AB carried. Even someone like Gotti looked to them for protection. Their reputation as brutal enforcers only grew. In 1993, the Aryan Brotherhood joined forces with black Muslims and other prison gangs during the Lucasville prison riot in Ohio. It was an unusual alliance, but it showed just how far the Brotherhood would go to get what they wanted. The rioters took hostages, killed 9 inmates, and murdered a correctional officer. Their demands ranged from better conditions to medical exemptions, but underneath it all was the pure display of gang control. No warden, no officer, no policy had more power than the gangs running the show inside those walls. But their flexibility is what really set them apart. According to the Department of Homeland Security, while other white supremacist groups stick hard to their ideology, the Aryan Brotherhood bends when it needs to. They're not always marching for race. They're moving for money. This makes them more dangerous. They aren't locked into one mission. They're criminals first, racists second. That mix of business and blood has kept them alive for decades. Even with countless members locked up in maximum security, even with leaders in isolation, the orders keep coming. Drugs still move, targets still get hit, and the new recruits keep coming in ready to take the oath and earn their ink. The Aryan Brotherhood started as a reaction to prison integration, but it became something far bigger. A brotherhood bound not just by hate, but by profit. A name that whispers across cell blocks, passed through pipe taps and smuggled kites, and a gang that decades later still runs its game from the shadows. When law enforcement finally made a big move against the Aryan Brotherhood in late 2002, they did it with force. A total of 29 high-ranking members were rounded up from different prisons across the country and charged under the RICO Act. This law, usually used to target the mafia, was now aimed at the brand. The plan was simple: hit them hard, hit them publicly, and aim for the death penalty in at least 21 cases. But things didn't go exactly as planned. Out of all the trials and legal battles that followed, 30 convictions were secured, but none of the gang's most powerful leaders were sentenced to death. Instead, Barry Mills and Tyler Bingham, two of the highest-ranking members, were both given life in prison without parole. They were sent back to ADX Florence, the country's toughest federal prison. Bingham is still there today. Mills died behind those walls in 2018. These men were already locked up when they ordered killings, beatings, and drug deals. Prosecuting them was never going to be easy. One of the biggest problems for law enforcement has always been this: many AB members are already serving life, so what's left to threaten them with? That's why the government went after death sentences. But out of the 21 they aimed for, only 5 were even considered. The rest of the cases ended in guilty pleas by September 2006. The message was clear, but the gang wasn't done. Even while their top dogs were on trial, the Brotherhood kept working. In 2005, a 20-month federal investigation led to a raid on 6 homes in Ohio tied to a group called the Order of the Blood, a crew connected to AB. That day, 34 people were arrested, and 10 more were on the run. But the deeper the feds dug, the more they saw how far AB's network had spread. In June 2019, another major strike came down. 16 Aryan Brotherhood members and associates were hit with federal charges after a multi-year investigation. These weren't small-time crimes. The charges included murder, attempted murder, drug trafficking, and racketeering. And just like before, many of the people involved were already serving life sentences. One of them was Ronald Renegade Yandel, a 61-year-old inmate from California State Prison, Sacramento. A federal jury found him guilty in April 2024 of murder in aid of racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, drug distribution, and much more. And he wasn't alone. In the same case, inmate Danny Troxel, 71, and Billy Sylvester, 55, were also found guilty on multiple counts, including murder and drug trafficking. All 3 men were already doing life, but the new convictions proved that even locked down, these men still called the shots. Meanwhile, the gang's presence wasn't just limited to prison yards. On the outside, they had influence too. In June 2020, a man linked to the Aryan Cowboy Brotherhood, a related group, was named as the mysterious Umbrella Man during the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis. He was suspected of starting the first major act of looting and arson. As of 2022, no charges had been filed against him, but the story caused serious concern about how these gangs use moments of chaos for their own moves. Then, in November 2020, law enforcement made another huge sweep. Over 60 people tied to AB were arrested in a multi-agency operation that stretched across California, Montana, and Nevada. What they found was proof that the Brotherhood wasn't slowing down. They were running drugs, selling guns, and linked to violent crimes across the West Coast. And it wasn't just local. The investigation showed ties as far as Alabama. In total, cops seized 80 pounds of meth, 5 pounds of heroin, and over 25 firearms. When the Aryan Brotherhood first came together in 1964, it was mostly about race. They formed inside San Quentin for self-protection against the black prison gang, and for a long time, they held on to that white supremacist identity. But over the years, things started to shift. Money began to matter more than hate. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Brotherhood may still preach racism, but business now comes first. They've even worked with Latino gangs like the Mexican Mafia, sworn enemies on the street but useful allies behind bars. Both groups share enemies like the Black Guerrilla family, so partnerships happen when needed. This idea of setting aside ideology for profit is what makes the Aryan Brotherhood even more dangerous. They adapt and they stay focused on power. Federal agencies see this as a major problem. Daryl Johnson, who leads the domestic terrorist analysis team, has called white supremacist prison gangs a serious radicalization threat. He pointed to groups like the Aryan Brotherhood, Aryan Circle, and Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. They don't just cause problems in prison, they train people who continue the violence outside after release. An FBI report from 1989 said the Brotherhood was a violent white supremacist group. Nearly 2 decades later, in 2008, the Department of Homeland Security said the same thing and warned that prison gangs like AB are a growing concern in domestic extremism. The hatred is still there, but now it's powered by money, drugs, and organized violence. Speaking of which, joining the Aryan Brotherhood isn't easy. You have to be white, already inside prison, or have done time, and ready to prove your loyalty in blood. That usually means committing violence. It can be killing a rival, stabbing a guard, or taking out a target that the gang orders. Once you're in, it's for life. And to seal the deal, new members take a blood oath. Estimates say there are about 15,000 to 20,000 AB members across the U.S., both locked up and on the streets. Inside prison, they run prostitution, gambling, extortion, and drug smuggling. Meth is one of their main drugs. Outside, it's even bigger. Murder for hire, armed robbery, gun running, heroin sales, fake money, and identity theft. Nothing's off limits. New members often get schooling from older members. They pass around books like Mein Kampf, The Art of War, and The Prince by Machiavelli. These books shape how they think about power, loyalty, and strategy. Some even idolize cowboys and outlaws from old Western novels. Others admire Vikings and pirates. It's about being fearless, violent, and in control. And control is everything. In many prisons, AB members are organized under a strict system. In Arizona, they call each other kindred and split into families. Each family is managed by a council. New recruits, called progeny, are mentored closely. Every move is watched, every rule is enforced, and nobody steps out of line. Now, while the Aryan Brotherhood may seem like one big gang, it's actually 2 related groups. One controls California prisons, and the other runs federal lockups. Both have their own councils and commissions. Think of them like crime families, separate but close. Each side makes its own calls, but when needed, they back each other up. In the early days, every member had a vote, but as the gang grew, that system collapsed. Now it's all about rank. At the top, there's a 3-man commission. Below them, a 12-man council. Orders flow down. Members obey. That's how the Brotherhood stays tight. They also set up a kind of underground bank. They tax criminal work on the outside, usually 20%. That money gets funneled through secret networks and ends up under the control of the top guys. It's organized crime, plain and simple. They have alliances too. Smaller Peckerwood gangs like Nazi lowriders and Public Enemy #1 work with them. They've done deals with the Hells Angels. They've even teamed up with the Italian Mafia. Back in the 1990s, when John Gotti was in prison, he cut a deal with the Brotherhood for protection. That deal led to outside business partnerships that made both groups stronger. But there's always tension. In the East Bay, a power struggle between the Hells Angels and the Brotherhood led to the murder of a Hells Angels vice president in 1989. And while they've got strong alliances, their list of enemies is long. Black P. Stones, Bloods, Crips, DC Blacks, Nuestra Familia, and more. Despite all the raids, arrests, and life sentences, the Aryan Brotherhood keeps moving. From tiny cells in supermax prisons, they control criminal networks across the country. Taps on water pipes, coded letters, and outside foot soldiers keep the machine alive. And while law enforcement keeps trying to shut them down, the brand just keeps finding ways to stay in the game. But the brand isn't the only gang built to survive the system. On the other side of the racial divide, another group was rising, one driven not just by power, but by politics and revolution: the Black Guerrilla family. The Black Guerrilla family, also known as BGF Jama or the Black Vanguard, wasn't born on the streets like most gangs. It was built inside prison walls. In 1966, San Quentin State Prison became the birthplace of one of the most politically driven prison gangs in U.S. history. It started with George Jackson, W.L. Nolan, and George Big Jake Lewis. These men weren't just looking for power or protection. They wanted a movement, a purpose. George Jackson had been sentenced to 1 year to life for stealing $70 at gunpoint. But instead of breaking under the system, he turned himself into a revolutionary. He once said, "I met Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, Engels, and Mao when I entered prison, and they redeemed me." He studied politics, read books, and linked up with W.L. Nolan, a known fighter, thinker, and co-founder of the Black liberation movement inside California prisons. Together, they built something different. Inspired by Marcus Garvey and the Black Power movement, they created BGF, a group that wasn't just about race, but about revolution. They adopted Marxist-Leninist ideas and set clear goals: promote Black power, preserve dignity behind bars, and fight to overthrow the U.S. government. Their mission became known as Jamanomics, laid out in their Black Book. BGF members didn't just get tattoos for style. Their ink had meaning, symbols like crossed sabers, rifles, and the number 276. Others wore the image of a black dragon, said to represent their power rising from inside the system. BGF wasn't just a gang, it was a brotherhood tied together by politics, pain, and the fight for change. As time passed, the revolutionary roots of BGF started to mix with gang politics and street crime. And with that shift came violence. One of the darkest moments happened in 1979. Faye Stender, a lawyer who had once fought hard for prisoners' rights, was shot 5 times by a paroled BGF member named Edward Glenn Brooks. Before pulling the trigger, he forced her to say, "I, Faye Stender, admit I betrayed George Jackson and the prison movement when they needed me most." She survived but was left paralyzed. The pain became too much, and later she took her own life. Brooks was sentenced to 17 years for the attempted murder. That event exposed how deep BGF loyalty ran and how betrayal, real or perceived, would never be forgotten. Another major flashpoint came in 1989. Huey P. Newton, co-founder of the Black Panther Party, was shot and killed by BGF member Tyrone Robinson. The reason was long-standing tension. Many inside BGF felt Newton had abandoned Panthers who were locked up. Add to that Newton's crack cocaine addiction and the fact that he had been demanding free drugs from BGF-connected dealers. That disrespect couldn't stand. Robinson was later found guilty and sentenced to 32 years. That killing shook the community. Newton was a legend, but in the eyes of some BGF members, even legends weren't above the code. The 2015 Baltimore unrest brought BGF's name back into headlines. After the death of Freddie Gray, tensions exploded. Police claimed that BGF, along with the Bloods and the Crips, had teamed up to target officers, but the streets told a different story. Leaders from those gangs denied the claims and instead called for peace. In one video, gang members asked for calm and told people to protest without violence. They even helped stop riots at places like Security Square Mall. In other areas, they worked together to protect Black-owned businesses, children, and local reporters. Sometimes they redirected rioters toward non-Black-owned stores. It was strange seeing rivals stand side by side, but in those moments there was unity. This wasn't the BGF of the 1960s, but it still showed that the group could organize, influence, and act on a bigger level when needed. Politics, pain, and protection all mixed together, just like it did when the group was first formed. Inside prison walls, politics can change fast. But for decades, the Black Guerrilla family has remained locked in with 2 sworn enemies, the Aryan Brotherhood and the Mexican Mafia. These rivalries have led to countless fights, stabbings, and lockdowns in both California and the federal system. Racial lines are drawn sharp, and crossing them can mean death. But like everything in prison, nothing is ever simple. There have been rare moments when BGF leaders have worked alongside these enemies. One example came during the California hunger strike and the End to Hostilities movement. In those moments, politics made strange alliances. Shot callers from BGF, La AME, and the Aryan Brotherhood all sat down for a common cause. Still, not every member agreed. Take the case of Doc Holliday, a known BGF member who later testified in support of the Aryan Brotherhood during a conflict with the DC Blacks. That move wasn't taken lightly. Many in the BGF were furious. Some said he violated the code. Rumors spread that Doc was no longer welcome in certain prisons, and if he showed up, it wouldn't be pretty. This shows just how layered prison politics can be. One day you're a comrade, the next you're a target. Inside those walls, loyalty is everything. And even old friendships can turn into blood feuds. You see, BGF started with ideas, but like any prison gang, it didn't take long before those ideas were backed by violence. Members are known to be disciplined and well organized. They follow orders, they move in silence, but they strike with purpose. Over time, many in the group took on traditional gang operations, drugs, extortion, and hits. But they did it with a different kind of pride. Many still saw themselves as soldiers of the movement. The group's teachings are passed through writings, mostly found in their Black Book. It lays out their mission, values, and rules. Members study these lessons. They memorize names, dates, and revolutionary quotes. Some believe they are part of something larger, not just a gang, but a force fighting oppression from within the belly of the beast. They tattoo their bodies with signs that tell a story: dragons, sabers, shotguns. And while they're locked in with other gangs when it comes to warfare, they see their roots as different, not built for profit, but for purpose. Still, survival in prison demands action. Ideals don't stop knives, so BGF has always balanced its philosophy with force. From its earliest days to the chaos of modern prisons, it continues to stand as one of the most dangerous and politically driven gangs in America. And in the game of power behind bars, that mix of brains and brutality keeps the Black Guerrilla family firmly in the fight. But just when you think you've seen it all, another name steps out of the shadows, one that's just as feared, just as ruthless. Because in this war behind walls, the next gang doesn't just claim power, they call themselves family. La Nuestra Familia. In the world of prison gangs, few names hit as hard as La Nuestra Familia, which means our family in Spanish. But this isn't just a name. It's a promise, a code, and a warning. This gang was born inside the walls of Soledad Prison back in 1965. And from day one, it wasn't just about survival. It was about control, respect, and taking power back by any means. While most Norteños are seen as soldiers on the street, the real chain of command sits inside Nuestra Familia. These guys run the show, inside prison walls and out. And what started as protection for Mexican-American inmates from the South quickly turned into something much bigger. It wasn't just about defending turf anymore, it became about building an empire. One hit, one threat, one order at a time. Speaking of which, the beef with the Mexican Mafia goes way back. It all kicked off over something as small as a stolen pair of shoes in 1965. But inside, small things turned deadly fast. That moment lit the fuse for the longest-running prison gang war in California history. Since then, it's been red versus blue, norte versus sur, and the line was drawn right across California, with Bakersfield as the dividing point. You're either with La Familia or you're not. Now every gang lives by symbols. For Nuestra Familia, it's all about red. Red rags, red ink, red tattoos. The number 14 is everywhere too, because N is the 14th letter in the alphabet. You'll also see that sombrero and machete logo. It's not just art, it's a statement. Anyone wearing those marks is showing loyalty, power, and the willingness to bleed for the cause. Their rules are strict. No woman, no money, no drugs, nothing comes before the gang. That's what it means to take a blood oath. Once you're in, you don't walk away. These guys live and die by the code. And that loyalty isn't just for show. Every member is expected to follow the chain of command, and when the top talks, soldiers move. By 1979, the California Department of Corrections finally had to admit what was clear on the yard. Nuestra Familia wasn't just a group of angry inmates, it was a full-blown criminal organization. And while they may have started behind bars, their influence hit the streets fast. Cocaine, heroin, meth, it all moved through their network. And if you were a dealer on the outside, you paid up, or paid the price. Even their own structure got sharper over time. At Pelican Bay, leadership became more focused. A man named David D.C. Cervantes rose to the top, standing as the highest-ranking general. Alongside him were others like Daniel Stork Perez, Anthony Chuco Gillen, and George Puppet Franco. They weren't just talking about shots being called, they were the ones calling them. While law enforcement spent decades trying to bring them down, it wasn't easy. Nuestra Familia operated in shadows, moved through whispers, and communicated through smuggled phones, coded letters, or even secret taps on pipes. But in 2000, everything changed. Operation Black Widow cracked the door open. 22 members, including top generals, were indicted under RICO charges. The feds said it loud. This wasn't just a gang. It was a criminal empire responsible for over 600 murders in just 30 years. Those who ran the game from inside were sent to the federal supermax in Colorado, but even then, the leadership didn't break. In fact, their power struggle only made things more intense. Some stayed loyal to the old heads in Colorado. Others backed the new blood running things from Pelican Bay. But no matter the drama, one thing stayed true. Orders still flowed and the streets still burned. Speaking of which, its membership isn't for the weak. You don't just sign up, you swear in. You take a blood oath. And you never put anything above the familia. Women are kept out of full membership, but they're often used to pass messages or move product because law enforcement's less likely to suspect them. Today, the gang runs with roughly 250 hardcore members and over 1,000 associates. Their grip is strong, their code is deadly, and their name? It still echoes through every tier, every yard, and every cell block they've ever touched. For years, Nuestra Familia ran deep and quiet. Law enforcement couldn't get close. The gang's leadership worked from behind bars, especially inside Pelican Bay. But in the late 1990s, things began to change. The feds started watching closely, real close. And by 2000, it was time to make a move. That move was called Operation Black Widow. 22 members got indicted under the RICO Act. This law hits hard. It's made for taking down entire crime organizations. Some of these men were high-ranking leaders, running the game while still locked up. Out of the 22, 13 pleaded guilty. The rest fought the charges, but 2 of them faced something even heavier: the death penalty. Why? Because they were tied to gang-ordered murders, all for controlling the drug trade. During the time of Operation Black Widow, authorities said Nuestra Familia was behind at least 600 murders in the past 30 years. Think about that number. That's how far their grip reached. And to break their backbone, the government had to hit hard. The top 5 generals, James Tibbs Morado, Joseph Pinky Hernandez, Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba, Cornelio Tristan, and Tex Marin Hernandez, were sent to ADX Florence, the federal supermax in Colorado. That's where the worst of the worst get buried alive behind concrete and steel. But even after that, the game wasn't over. By 2010, Nuestra Familia's grip had shifted. The streets were heating up and the Central Coast had become a battleground. That's when law enforcement launched Operation Knockout, a name that fit the goal. The target was the gang's leadership in that area. After months of building the case, the crackdown hit hard. At least 37 suspected gang members were taken in during the raids. What they found told a big story: 40 pounds of cocaine, 14 pounds of marijuana, and dozens of guns. This wasn't small-time hustle. This was organized street power backed by a prison empire. The idea was to stop the flow of money and drugs, and to break the chain of command on the outside. But every time one leader fell, another stepped in. That's the strength of a gang built on blood oaths and lifetime loyalty. And still, even with raids, arrests, and lockdowns, the heart of the operation beat on. Then came June 11th, 2013. That day, the Santa Clara County District Attorney stepped up and announced something massive. 48 associates of Nuestra Familia had been indicted. And not just for petty crimes. These men faced 77 felony charges, from drug trafficking to murder. This wasn't just about catching foot soldiers. This was about showing how deep the gang's network ran through California communities. From San Jose to Salinas, from prisons to street corners, Nuestra Familia was moving weight and making hits. And they weren't doing it alone. Court evidence showed that gang members behind bars were calling shots using contraband phones, managing their people outside like a general runs a war. Murder orders, drug deals, money laundering. It all flowed like clockwork. That's when it became clear. Locking up leaders wasn't enough. The system itself had to be attacked from the inside out. By 2024, the feds were ready to go after the very top. This time, they weren't just looking at soldiers or captains. They wanted the general council, the highest-ranking leaders inside Nuestra Familia. The trial lasted 12 weeks. 4 top figures stood accused: David Cervantes, aka DC, James Perez, aka Conejo, Guillermo Solorio, aka Capone, George Franco, aka Puppet. The jury listened to over 50 witnesses, tapped phone calls, and testimonies that painted a dark picture of how the gang operated like a corporation. Murder conspiracies, drug networks, leadership orders, all of it came to light. David Cervantes was one of the 3 generals at the very top. His job was to oversee discipline. That meant investigating members, handling complaints, and deciding whether someone should be attacked or killed for breaking gang rules. He also commanded the Kings County Street Regiment, running drug business and street violence outside prison walls. Cervantes was found responsible for multiple murder plots and attempted hits between 2015 and 2019. James Perez, the general of prisons, had full control over all Nuestra Familia operations inside California prisons. He appointed prison leaders, handled drug sales inside, and collected a share of all profits. He also ran things in San Mateo County on the outside. He too was tied to murder conspiracies and attempted killings. George Franco was on the inner council and managed the San Joaquin Regiment. He wasn't just an advisor to the generals. He sat on the council that decided everything from promotions to punishments. Like the others, he was convicted for his role in murder plots and drug moves. Guillermo Solorio, also part of the inner council, controlled operations in Monterey County. He ran one of the largest drug routes in Fresno and was tied directly to gang violence, including attempted murders. All 4 men were convicted of racketeering conspiracy. And with those verdicts, the government said they had finally taken down all 7 members of Nuestra Familia's General Council. These trials weren't just about locking up gang leaders, they were about sending a message. Running a gang from behind bars will not be tolerated. As one prosecutor said, prison gangs are a blight on the criminal justice system. They frustrate rehabilitation and bring more violence into society. The FBI called the convictions the result of 8 years of deep, complex investigation. Their task force had worked across dozens of agencies, digging into calls, letters, prison records, and street movements. From the Santa Clara County Safe Streets Task Force to federal agents in San Francisco and Sacramento, the system had gone all in. The result was a full takedown of Nuestra Familia's senior leadership. It wasn't just a blow to one gang, it was a warning shot to all prison-based criminal networks. Even if you build walls around your empire, the law will still find a way to crash in. And yet, just like every chapter before, this one ends not with silence, but with eyes watching. Because in the world of prison gangs, someone always rises to fill the gap. So these were the most dangerous prison gangs and their leaders in the U.S. Do you think prison gangs have more power inside prison than they ever did on the streets? And can the system ever truly stop leaders who run entire criminal empires from behind bars? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.